I'm Maddie Molina, and welcome back to my YouTube channel. Today I'm here with a very special guest, Zack Rago. Now, Zack is one of the main characters in the 2017 Netflix documentary film, Chasing Coral. And if you haven't seen Chasing Coral, I highly recommend it. Now, Zack first joined the film as a camera technician, but when the filmmakers saw his love and passion for coral, they moved him into the spotlight. Now, when Zack is not starring in documentaries, he is working for his PhD at the Hawaii Institute of Marine Biology. Hi, Zack, and thank you so much for joining me today.
Hi, thank you for having me. I'm really excited to chat.
So first, Chasing Coral is an amazing film. So how did you go from being a camera tech to being one of the main characters?
A lot of it was really just being in the right place at the right time. I had just started my job working at View Into the Blue, the company that makes the cameras. And I think the notion of kind of having a young kid that was willing to go out into the field and maybe do a little bit more of that dirty work in the field allowed me to kind of get selected to go out and install these cameras for the film team, which is called Exposure Labs. And that was really all it was. I was just a young kid that was hired to get these cameras set up and ensure they're working, and was never supposed to be on camera, was never supposed to be really any bigger part of the documentary. I actually didn't know that I was the star of the film or, really even that integrated into the film until the first time I saw it, really.
What do you think Chasing Coral has had on people's awareness? Have you seen any changes in people's behavior?
Yeah, in terms of behavior, it's kind of a tough question because behavior is really hard to, quantify to a certain extent. But what it has changed is certainly the conversations that we're having and the amount of visibility that coral reefs, and particularly the threat that they're under, has gotten from the general public, whether that's simply the fact that you can get on social media and see content about the plight of our world's coral reefs, but also just conversations at bigger levels, whether that's at the government level, or just whether that's at small scale community levels. Our team actually did an impact campaign with Chasing Coral, which is this amazing thing where we built an amazing group of people, took the film and basically tried to insert it into communities and into situations that we thought it could be useful. And just through that programming alone, in our first 2 years, had reached, hundreds of thousands of people with the film in educational settings, in political settings, and was able to kind of insert it as a tool to be able to kind of open the door to climate change conversations, sustainability conversations. And I think in that sense, it made a really big difference because if you go before the mass bleaching event from, 2015 to 2016, finding content on bleaching is relatively difficult in terms of imagery and visualizations and things that are useful to us in a day and age where we have very short attention spans. We need to be fed things in little 30-second digestible tidbits, and having that type of content and kind of bridging art with something that's going on kind of within the scientific community, I think was incredibly important and has made a huge difference in terms of how the general public views corals currently.
You said that climate change is affecting corals. So can you explain how?
Yeah, so corals are these kind of majestic creatures that seem so simple, but in reality, they're kind of beautifully complex and beautifully sophisticated because they are animals, and they're stationary animals, but they actually use an algae called zooxanthellae that lives within their tissue. And that zooxanthellae, or that algae, actually photosynthesizes, it uses the sunlight, and they actually produce the vast majority of the energy or the food resource for the coral. So it's this kind of beautiful relationship of symbiosis. The catch, however, is that as climate change alters our planet, and particularly temperatures on our planet, as sea surface temperatures increase, these algae start to misbehave, for lack of better words. They, instead of producing food and energy for the coral, they start producing really nasty stuff. And the coral recognizes this and basically says, I need to get rid of this. It's harming me. and they spit out their energy source. And long term, if the temperature doesn't come down, that leaves the coral in a position where it can actually starve. And in time periods like what happened in Australia in 2016, and really globally from 2015 through kind of the beginning of 2017, we saw this massively at scale at a global level. And we saw a lot of corals die because of that. So it's something that's happening more and more frequently over the past decade. And it certainly put corals in kind of a precarious position.
On a happier note, you got the nickname Coral Nerd as a kid. How did you get that?
I'd like to think I got it as a kid, but I think more than anything, it was a good way for me to describe kind of my passion for corals within the film. I've definitely been a coral nerd since I was a kid, but I just kind of got hooked and was always kind of interested and wanted to learn more and more as I was growing up. And I guess that nerdery, so to speak, just never went away.
Did you grow coral in tanks as a kid?
Yeah, so I started my first aquarium probably at like 10 or 11, and certainly at that time wasn't as, successful as I'd like to be. There's always a massive learning curve with something like that, but yeah, I spent many years up until even today growing corals on a regular basis, both for my own pleasure and enjoyment as a hobby and also more professionally.
If you can grow it in tanks, do you think coral can be regrown in the ocean?
Yeah, so there are lots of projects that grow coral in our oceans. So restoration's become a huge topic. Where we need to restore reefs can be difficult because in many of these places, sometimes the people don't even have, deep integrated relationships with the coral reef. And so the educational factor that restoration projects brings to those communities, I think, is perhaps the most important thing. However, on the kind of, I guess, more pessimistic side, when we think about restoration, it's very difficult to imagine a situation where we as humans have the power and scalability to actually grow enough coral to protect global coral reefs. But the science that we do through restoration, the educational component, and our ability to get people involved, I think, is incredibly important.
In Chasing Coral, one of the scenes that really stayed with me was seeing the corals develop this neon fluorescent color and your reaction to that. So have you learned more about this phenomenon since you discovered it?
We didn't necessarily discover the fluorescing, but what we were able to do was really document it at scale for one of the first times. It's so infrequent, luckily, because it only occurs with these mass bleaching events. We have guesses about what's going on, but we certainly don't know the answer quite yet. What we do know, or what we think we know, is that they're not really protecting themselves from the heat. They're actually protecting themselves from UV radiation, which is something that occurs kind of hand in hand with these El Nino events and mass bleaching events. And they kind of make a decision to say, you know what, I'm going to use my extra energy and I'm going to put that towards kind of producing this artificial sunscreen that's going to protect me from a variable that I can protect myself from. So it's a super interesting phenomenon, but I think it's one of those questions that's just waiting to be answered by somebody.
Do you know if corals die after they have these colors, or can they be saved?
So sometimes they do, right? So in the film, there was a really big focus on kind of this large-scale fluorescing that occurred on New Caledonia. And as far as I know, those corals had relatively decent survivalship ratings. And so we think that it did benefit that population of corals that fluoresced. However, I've had the experience where I've seen it kind of go the other way, where at Lizard Island, the handful of corals that did go through this fluorescing didn't necessarily make it, and they tended to die quicker. So one of the things that I've observed is a coral that doesn't bleach, you tend to kind of see the death start in one small location on the coral colony, and then over a matter of days, that necrotic tissue or that mortality kind of moves across the coral colony until it's all dead. Whereas in comparison, corals that fluoresced, they've decided to use all of that extra energy that they had. They kind of went all in, a last ditch effort, so to speak. And so when they die, they don't tend to do it slowly. They tend to do it quite rapidly. So I've had situations, especially with the filming of Chasing Coral, where I have a site, I've got some, nice blue neon corals that I was filming. And I go to bed one night, come back the next day, and it's completely dead.
So, because of this pandemic, people aren't traveling as much. So, do you think that this has helped corals, and have you seen any changes?
Yeah, I think like the rest of us who have gone through this past year, I haven't been able to get in the water as much as I would like. So I think a lot of those answers are going to come here in the next year as we're able to get back and start getting into the swing of doing research again and being able to go out and about and dive more regularly. However, there's a handful of projects, one of which my lab is involved with. The community here has been doing kind of camera traps and a variety of other work to look at fish behavior in particular, to see if the decrease in people at a very popular beach here in Hawaii has had some change on the behavior of herbivorous fish. But I think the quick answer is it's certainly going to have some variety of positive effects.
You recently joined the Hawaii Institute of Marine Biology. So are there any new things that you're working on?
Yeah, so I'm pretty brand new. I just started last semester. And the questions that I'm keen to answer right now are, we're working on this phenomenon of coral reef halos, which are these cool kind of barren patches that exist around coral reefs all over the world. And what we know is that they have something to do with predator-prey interactions. The fish that eat the algae, they like the protection of the reef, and they're scared to travel too far away from that protection. When they graze, they leave behind these barren areas around a reef. Basically, I'm setting up big aquarium-style enclosures and attempting to test and understand what's actually going on from a mechanism perspective to create these halos or alter them. And then long term, we've got lots of questions about, whether or not these halos can be used as indicators for coral reef health. And the beauty of it is we can see them on satellite. It should be really exciting to see if we can, kind of cut the cost down of marine conservation by using satellites.
Yeah, that sounds really nice and cool. Do you know if there's ordinary things that people can do to save coral at home?
Yeah, it's a great question. I think the biggest thing that I always think of is, here in the States in particular, unless you're in Florida or Hawaii, you probably don't have a coral reef in your backyard that you're really passionate about, or that your community can focus on directly saving. The biggest thing that I always tell people is that we have to just protect what we're able to and focus on our own communities. The answers are going to be different here in Honolulu than they are in Denver, Colorado, or in London, England. There are simple things that we've all heard before. Reducing our own carbon footprints, using less plastic. And perhaps most importantly, it's about, I think, educating and communicating with those around us and kind of spreading the word, because we all collectively have to change kind of our lifestyles and the way that we live as a species at global scale in order to fight these problems. And then secondarily, there are plenty of us that actually do have connections to the ocean and are avid divers. And anybody that's in the water or has a camera can take data and participate in citizen science and truly help out the scientific community.
Finally, do you have any recommendations for me and the others who are passionate about spreading the word on what's happening about coral? And do you have any way that we can help increase the awareness?
The biggest thing is just to keep doing what you're doing, right? You're already an all-star that has these channels or spreading the word at kind of a massive scale for your age and within your community. So first and foremost, it's about just keeping the energy and keeping the curiosity going for what you're already doing. And then secondly, I think just even beyond you is always just to remember that, no matter where you end up in your life, what career path you choose, inherently all of us are connected to nature one way or another. And and passionate about something to do with the natural world. And many of us get disheartened by, well, I don't like science, I don't like math, I'm not into STEM. But in reality, none of that matters because we all have a role and we all have something to bring to the table.
Well, Zach, thank you so much for your time today. And thank you all for your work on corals. We all appreciate everything that you do to help save this precious and critical part of our ecosystem.
Well, thank you so much. I appreciate everything that you're doing to protect this ecosystem and spreading the good word.